Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this month's Connect with Control M session. My name is Froilan Reyes, and I'm a technical support analyst. Today, we will be discussing about Control M Enterprise Manager authorizations for version 9.2.0. Joining me are our panelists for today, my distinguished colleagues, Octavio Vasquez and Taylor Clapp. During this presentation, we recommend going to full screen mode by pressing the full screen button below. Additionally, please note that this presentation is available via the Files pod on the bottom of your screen. For any questions you may have during the presentation, please feel free to post them in the Q&A pod. We will be addressing your questions at the end of the session. Let's take a look at the agenda. For today's agenda, we will begin with a brief overview of basic Control M authorizations entities and terminology. For the Control M authorizations portion, we will talk about these in more detail, which will include a quick demo for each authorizations category. There will also be a recap of what is discussed and to provide some links for additional information. Finally, we will end the presentation with a team of panelists who will respond to your inquiries in the Q&A pod. User and roles can be limited or granted for the planning and monitoring domain, web interface, and configuration manager. These roles can be divided into two major categories, which we refer to as admin and non-admin users. There are two ways to manage Control MEM authorizations: Configuration Manager or Automation API. For this presentation, we will only be using Configuration Manager, and a link will be provided later for information about Control M Automation API. I want to take this opportunity to introduce a new functionality for version 9.2.0 named Role-Based Administration. Prior to this version, authorizing non-administrators to manage application plugin connection profiles was done via cm_admin.xml file. This method is no longer required nor supported for version 9.2.0. Role-based administration is now managed via CCM. Additionally, a new entity named tag names allows you to create logical names that can be used for RBA management for mapping purposes. Let's proceed in discussing this in detail. The planning domain offers the options to create or modify job definitions, calendars, and order jobs. These actions are controlled by the Folder tab of the Authorizations window. Let's do a quick demo on this. Anytime a modification is performed by the admin, all users affected by this change needs to completely log out of any GUI server connection. To save some time, I have pre-created users for this demo. So in the authorizations, I've created a role named CWCM profile, which also has a member named CWCM plugin. This means that this user will inherit all the privileges of this role. Additionally, for the planning domain, we're only going to be concentrating on two tabs, which is the Folder tab and the Calendars tab. So let's take a look at what I did in the Calendars tab. For this user only has browse privileges for this Control M server, and the calendar name user can't change. Subsequently, this user has update privileges on this Control M server, and a calendar name admin can change. So let's see what happens when we try to log in as this user. So we're now logged in as CWCM_plugin. So the first thing you will notice right off the bat is this particular calendar named user underscore can't change. I should not be able to have any privileges to this particular calendar. And if you notice, the checkout button is grayed out. So it's the first indication that you don't have privileges, and you also have a lock button on the side. And the admin can change. I should have privileges here, and you can see that there's a checkout option. So I need to check that out, add some modification, hit OK, and it should be good. And once I check in, I am allowed to do so as well. Let's talk about the folder domain. Now that we're back on the configuration manager, I want to show you how we configured the CWCM_profile role. And by doing that, we're going to check the folders tab. So this is going to be your privileges under the planning domain. And the folders tab allows you to provide certain filtering criteria based on either the Control M server name, library name, and folder name. It also gives you the option to allow this user to order or not. And another level of authorizations is job level, where you can also filter by application and sub application. We're not using that today. So for this user should only have the ability to look at or have full rights on folders that name test and var. So we'll now go ahead, proceed, and take a look at a quick demo for this particular user. Now that we're back on the configuration manager, I want to show you how we configured the CWCM underscore profile role. And by doing that, we're going to check the folders tab. So this is going to be your privileges under the planning domain. And the folders tab allows you to provide certain filtering criteria based on either the control and server name, library name, and folder name. It also gives you the option to allow this user to order or not. And another level of authorizations is job level, where you can also filter by application and sub application. We're not using that today. So for this user should only have the ability to look at or have full rights on folders that name test and var. So we'll now go ahead, proceed, and take a look at a quick demo for this particular user. Now that we're back into the GUI as the CWCM underscore plugin user, we're not going to really do a deep dive on the authorizations, but I want to show you a quick way of finding out whether the authorizations that you've created is actually working. So the first thing that you want to do is hit the load while you're in the planning domain on a blank workspace, and if expand the list of folders that you're able to access to. This is you're only limited to this. There's a ton of folders in this particular environment. So this really proves that the authorization is working for the way we currently have it set. So after this now, we'd like to move on to the monitoring, and we're going to go back to our slides and talk a little bit more about the monitoring domain. For the monitoring domain, the configuration of resources and condition privileges have their own tabs on the authorizations panel, so they're not so easy to miss. For job actions, they are defined under the active tab, and viewpoints, on the other hand, are defined in the privileges tab. For users who need access to the monitoring domain, the first thing the user needs is privileges to viewpoints. So let me show you where to apply it. For this demo, we'll be using the same pre-created role named CCM underscore profile. For the viewpoints, you will need to go to the privilege tabs. Under the privileges tabs, you will see the viewpoint all the way at the bottom. And for this particular demo, we will set it to browse, but you have the option to set it to full, update, or none. In Control M, there are entities called prerequisite conditions, control resources, quantitative resources, and global conditions. These are entities that can control the flow of your jobs. Manually create these entities in order to satisfy requirements of jobs execution. Let's check the current privileges of this user. So for global conditions, this user has full privileges for any global condition that starts with CWCM. So he can create, delete, do whatever he wants. Quantitative resource. This user also have full privileges on any quantitative resource that starts with CWCM. For control resource, this user only has browse privileges, but it's for all control resources. And prerequisite conditions, you have the option to, at least you have the ability to update. The most used portion of the monitoring authorization is the active tab. This allows you to provide privileges to jobs that are currently on the AGF. For this demo, we're using an example of filtering by folder name and for any kind of folder that starts with test. But you, on the authorizations or filtering, you can specify any kind of filtering you want. So once you've specified the filter that you need, you can go outside of the filtering menu and then pick whatever privileges the user needs, can or will have, like looking at properties, logs, free, and set OK. And once you hit that OK, hit yes, everything should be set. Let's go to the monitoring domain. I've also pre-ordered these jobs so that we don't have to order them during the demo. So according to our privileges, This user should not have any kind of privileges amongst these two jobs named DB job and dummy job, but it uh, should be able to look at the log and the properties and set this test to free. So let's just take a look at see if we can take a look at the properties of this job. You should not be able to since you're not authorized. And from here, if you look at the properties, you should be allowed to get a little bit of information. Now let's check out the other entities that we were discussing earlier, the quantitative control resources. So for that, we're going to go to the tools domain. And under the tools domain, you have other options here, like under production control. You have the option to go to control resource, quantitative resources, global conditions, and just the regular conditions. So for quantitative resources, you should have, at least this particular user, should have the ability to create a resource named CWCM, nothing else, because the filter does not allow, it's very specific. You have to specify the exact resource name for a quantitative resource. So let's see if we can, if it allows to create one. So we're successful. We should be able to delete this resource as well. So once we refresh it, should have the option to delete it, and we can refresh and it's gone. If you try to add another resource that matches the name, it won't work because we shouldn't have any kind of authorization. So it says failed to add resource. And the same logic will follow with the control resources, the global condition prefixes, and conditions. Basically, this user will have privilege to create conditions that starts with CWCM, controls resource that matches CWCM as well. So let's go ahead and take a step back. We'll go back to our slides and talk about the configuration manager. By default, non-admin users will not be able to access the configuration manager. In order to provide access, the Privilege tab has an option to specify if a user or role has access to the configuration manager. As mentioned in previous slides, this new functionality called Role-Based Administration provides a more granular option for managing components. You can grant or limit access to all agents or be very specific which agent can be modified, plugins, or application type, for example, SAP, database, MFT, OS, etc. Not only can you grant application type level, but you can be very specific on which connection profile a user has access to. And finally, you're now allowed to control run as administration per control M server. Let's go on a quick demo. For Configuration Manager, the first thing you need is access. In order for anybody to have access, somebody needs to give you some privilege. Like for example, this user that we're going to be using is called RB user. This user belongs to a group name or assigned role named Browse Group. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Browse Group or Browse Role. Under the Privilege tab, it has a specific section for Configuration Manager. You need to have at least some kind of browse privilege in order for you to access the Configuration Manager. Once you have access there, then the admin can be very specific at what kind of privilege you may have. And let's get out of the authorizations temporarily. And I want to show you a new uh, entity in version 9.2.0 called agent tag names. On version 9.2.0, when you right click an agent, this is the agent that we're currently working with. Take a look at the properties. One of the options that you'll see is the field tag. So you should be able to provide any kind of logical name in this tag field. So you should be able to associate the tag name with rule-based administration. For this particular demo, we're giving it the name plug. Let's look at role-based administration management. I've created a new user called RB user, which has this following role-based administration privileges. You can see the four different categories that I mentioned earlier in the slides. And also, if you noticed, we're using the tag name or agent tag name plug that we use for this role-based administration. This user will have browse privileges for this particular agent. It has browse privileges for control and for Hadoop. And also, it has update privileges for control and for Hadoop type jobs and for job names, it starts with the letter F. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this user can do. We are currently logged in to the Configuration Manager as the EM user account, as I want to show you profiles that are only available for the admin account. So for the control room databases, we have one connection profile that only the EM administrator has access to. The RB user should not even be able to see the listing here if he tries to access the connection profile. And for the control room for Hadoop, we we have a few connection profiles here, and one's named admin underscore Hadoop, and the one is for underscore CWCM. So according to the privileges that we set, RB user should only have access to any connection profile or a Hadoop connection profile that starts with the letter F. So let's go ahead and pull in the RB user account. Now that we're logged into the configuration manager as the RB user account, you should not be able to see some of the connection profiles that only the admin can see. For example, the control room database, we should not have access to this because we did not give it the privileges for the control room for database plugin type. For Hadoop, RB user has privileges, but it only has privilege over the connection profile that starts with an F. So we should not be seeing the other uh, connection profile that was seen by the control room admin. Let's go ahead and proceed and talk about the web services now. For users who use self-service browser interface, there are entities called services where users can either have drill down, run, hold, resume, and view the contents of the service. This can be defined under the Services tab, and user views can be controlled under the Site Standards tab. So let's take a look at this. For the web interface demo, we will be using the role CCM underscore profile once again. There are two places where we have to set privileges for web interface. That's going to be in the Services tab and the Site Standards tab. The Services tab allows you to create a filter or filter whatever service name that you want for this particular user and give it certain privileges. For this particular demo, we're giving it everything except for drill down privileges for any service that's named CWCM underscore jobs. For site standards, we're allowing this user to create, delete, or modify user views that are named C underscore CM. You will not be able to create any other user view patterns except for this name. So let's go ahead and look at the web interface to show you what these privileges do. We are now logged in as a CWCM plugin account. So let's see what kind of privileges this user has. So the first thing I want to show you is the user views. And this user should only have access to a user view named CWCM. Just trust me on this. There's a number of user views for this particular environment, and as you can see, this user cannot see any of the user views. But we should be able to create a new user view called CWCM, and we should be allowed to. And if you notice, it allows us to create a CWCM, but when I start typing new entries, like underscore, you're going to get a message that you're not allowed to create a user because you're only allowed for CWCM. And now the other part of the web interface is the services. So let's go to the services tab. And as you can see, you should be able to see service named C underscore CM underscore jobs and no other privileges for other services. Also, again, trust me that there's a number of services in this particular environment that you just can't see. The other option that we did not allow this user to do is to be able to browse jobs within the service. So when you try to browse jobs, you should get an error that you're not authorized. And finally, one of the things that we gave this user is to be able to order a service. And when you click order service, it will give you a list of services that you are allowed to order. For this particular user, it's only allowed CWCM underscore jobs, so that's the only one that you're allowed to order. For the last part of the demo, I just want to quickly touch on some very basic troubleshooting for authorizations. You may run into situations where you are not confident whether a user has inherited the roles privilege or modifications for the user is not going to affect. So let's go back to the configuration manager. To test whether a particular user has inherited the privileges of the role, there's a new functionality we call simulation. You could simulate for LDAP accounts, and then you could also simulate local EM user accounts. For this demo, we're using a local EM account, and I want to show you the current privilege of this account. This user should not have any role-based administration uh, defined for the privileges, but since it's inheriting from the CCM profile, it should be inheriting those privileges. So if we simulate the privileges for this user, we should see that it should have the role-based administration privileges, as you can see. And the other troubleshooting that you might want to do is if you created some authorizations and it doesn't seem to take effect, the one thing that you should be checking is whether the user has actually logged out. So for that, you right-click the GUI server, go to the control shell, and run a command called pgui and hit apply. You will see a list of users that is currently logged in to the GUI server. And if you notice, there's a user named EM user and there's a user called CWCM plugin. That means this user has one connection to the GUI server. The user needs to log out of all connections in order for change to take effect. So once the user is logged out, you should be able to log in once again. So let's go ahead and discuss or have a quick recap of all the demos that we performed for today. For the planning domain demo, we created a user that has full privileges to the folder named test, but is not allowed to order jobs. The same user has update access to a calendar named admin can change, but not allowed to create one. For monitoring, we created a user that can view the login properties, free, and set the job to OK, but cannot create or modify viewpoints. On the configuration manager, we showed the basic functionality of the role-based administration, where the user only has browse on agent with a type name plug. He has browse privileges on the control M for Hadoop, has update access to a control M for Hadoop profile that starts with F, and this user has run as update on all the control M servers. Here are some of the resources available that will be helpful with authorizations. The links for the above will be posted in this meeting. Thank you for attending this presentation. We hope the information provided was useful in helping you understand Control EM authorizations. We would like to encourage you to go to the feedback tab and let us know what you thought about the presentation and if any topics you may want to cover in the future or any comments or suggestions you might have. Also, we will be sending you a survey in the following days and would appreciate if you took a few minutes of your time to fill your responses and send these in. You may follow us on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Past BMC webinars may be viewed on BMC Software Control M channel on YouTube. Today's webinar will be posted in a couple of days, and we will now proceed with the Q&A session.